Hi, hello, welcome. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, who is recording this very early in the morning because little peek behind the scenes. Yesterday, I spent so much time cleaning my house, I forgot it was Thursday, and that today, I needed to have an episode. So first thing Friday morning, let's record a reading, shall we? And so now at 7 in the morning, I would like to read to you the last couple of sections of The Fall of Troy. We have half of book 13 left and then the final book. And I forgot I'd ended it at such a dark place last week. Not that, there are particularly light places in this particular text. But looking back to remind myself of where we left off, I am reminded that we are sort of right in the middle of the fall of Troy, for lack of a better term. We are right in the middle of when those Greeks streamed out of the Trojan horse and just started absolutely destroying the city. It's, I feel like I just have all of the commentary in the world, but maybe we'll wait until the end. For now, I don't know if it's necessary to recall what women of Troy have already been enslaved by the Greeks or which are still to go, but that's kind of where we are. And particularly I saw that one of the last words I read last week is thraldom, and looking back on it, I'm reminded it's one of those words that just screams to me of old white men translating these early texts. Because, between thraldom and, ravish and wrapped away, we have some pretty, soft and shimmery words for absolute horror. Thraldom? Anyway, it means that they're being essentially taken as slaves of war, except because they're women, they're all gonna have great times with the Greeks. That's sarcasm. Let's just get straight in because, at least this end does seem, it's called The Return. So while I haven't read it yet, it seems like we're gonna get at least some of the travel back and we won't have an entire book about the horrors of these poor Trojan women. And it'll still be kind of fun along the way. This work has been incredibly interesting to read to you all. So very specifically, the two last tragedies we left off is that Andromache, the wife of Hector, has been brought to the Greeks very violently after, of course, their son Astyanax was thrown off the walls of Troy. Because remember, these ancient texts are not about glorifying war. They are not American movies about the valiant things they did in that foreign Middle East. They are intentional looks at the horrors of war, the damage it does to the people on both sides, the tragedy, the death, and again, it's 7 in the morning, so I'm going to not go too deep into this. Just having glanced at where we're returning, I will say we can at least find some joy in the way that the Trojan myth of Aeneas was written into this later work, because here's our always reminder, this Fall of Troy was written a comfortable 700 years, I'm guessing, but we're in that realm after the Iliad. And so it is not oral storytelling necessarily, or if it is not from the tradition where that was the primary source of storytelling. And it is at this world where Rome is a full-blown empire, looking pretty fancy. And while this guy is Greek and writing about Greek stories, he still has to be well, if I'm talking Aeneas, it's the Aeneas that founded Rome. So we can at least have a little silly with that. And also, I haven't seen yet if this work has him forgetting his wife in the fiery hellscape of his city, but he sure did in the Aeneid. So let's see. We're going to pretend like the rest of this book is just a happy place. Maybe, for now. Let's see. This is The Fall of Troy by Quintus Smyrnaeus, translated by A.S. Way. The remainder of Book 13 and the final book, 14. In all the homes of Troy lay dying men, and rose from all a lamentable cry, save only Antenor's halls. For unto him the Argives rendered hospitality's debt, for that in time past had his roof received and sheltered godlike Menelaus, when he with Odysseus came to claim his own. Therefore the mighty sons of Achaia showed grace to him as to a friend, and spared his life and substance, fearing Themis, who sees all. Then also princely Anchises' noble son, hard had he fought through Priam's burge that night with spear and valor, and many had he slain. When now he saw the city set aflame by hands of foes, saw her folk perishing in multitudes, her treasures spoiled, her wives and children dragged to thraldom from their homes, no more he hoped to see the stately walls of his birth city, but he thought now how from that mighty ruin to escape. And as the helmsman of a ship who toils on the deep sea and matches all his craft against the winds and waves from every side, rushing against him in the stormy time, forspent at last, both hand and heart, when now the ship is foundering in the surge, forsakes the helm to launch forth in a little boat, and heeds no longer ship or lading, so Anchises' gallant son forsook the town and left her to her foes, a sea of fire. His son and father alone he snatched from death. The old man, broken down with years, he set on his broad shoulders with his own strong hands, and led the young child by his small soft hand, whose little footsteps lightly touched the ground, and, as he quaked to see that work of death's his father led him through the roar of fight, and clinging hung on him the tender child, tears down his soft cheeks streaming. But the man over many a body sprang with hurrying feet, and in the darkness in his own despite trampled on many. Cypris guided them earnest to save from that wild ruin her son, his father, and his child. As on he pressed, the flames gave back before him everywhere. The blast of the fire god's breath to right and left was cloven asunder. Spears and javelins hurled against him by the Achaeans harmless fell. Also to stay them Calchas cried aloud, "Forbear against Aeneas' noble head to hurl the bitter dart. The deadly spear, fated he is by the high god's decree to pass from Xanthus, and by Tiber's flood to found a city holy and glorious through all time, and to rule over tribes of men far sundered. Of his seed shall lords of earth rule from the rising to the setting sun. Yes, with the immortals ever shall he dwell, who is son of Aphrodite lovely tressed. From him, too, is it meet we hold our hands, because he has preferred his father and son to gold, to all things that might profit a man who flees exiled to an alien land. This one night has revealed to us a man faithful to death, to his father and his child." Then hearkened they, and as a god did all look on him. Forth the city he hasted, he where his feet should bear him, while the foe made havoc still of goodly built Troy. Then also Menelaus in Helen's bower found, heavy with wine, ill-starred Deiphobus, and slew him with the sword. But she had fled and hidden in the palace. Over the blood of that slain man exulted he, and cried, "Dog! I, even I, have dealt thee unwelcome death this day. No dawn divine shall meet you again alive in Troy. Yes, though you vaunt yourself spouse of the child of Zeus, the thunder-voiced Black Death has trapped you slain in my wife's bower. Would I had met Alexander, too, in fight before this, and plucked his heart out. So my grief had been a lighter load. But he has paid already justice's death, has passed beneath death's cold dark shadow. Ha ha, small joy to you, my wife, was doomed to bring. Yes, wicked men never elude pure Themis. Night and day her eyes are on them, and the wide world through above the tribes of men she floats in air, holpen of Zeus for punishment of sin. On passed he, dealing merciless death to foes, for maddened was his soul with jealousy. Against the Trojans was his bold heart full of thoughts of vengeance, which were now fulfilled by the dread goddess Justice. For that theirs was that first outrage touching Helen, theirs that profanation of the oaths, and theirs that trampling on the blood of sacrifice when their presumptuous souls forgot the gods. Therefore the vengeance friends brought woes on them thereafter, and some died in fighting field, some now in Troy by board and bridal bower. Menelaus amid the inner chambers found at last his wife, there cowering from the wrath of her bold-hearted lord. He glared on her, hungering to slay her in his jealous rage. But winsome Aphrodite curbed him, struck out of his hand the sword, his onrush rained, jealousy's dark cloud swept she away, and stirred love's deep, sweet wellsprings in his heart and eyes. Swept over him the strange amazement. Powerless all was he to lift the sword against her neck, seeing her splendor of beauty. Like a stalk of dead wood in a mountain forest which no swiftly rushing blasts of north winds shake, nor fury of south winds ever, so he stood, so dazed abode long time. All his great strength was broken as he looked upon his wife, and suddenly he had forgotten all, yes, all her sins against her spousal betrothed. For Aphrodite made all fade away, she who subdues all immortal hearts and mortal. Yet even so he lifted up from earth his sword and made as he would rush upon his wife, but other was his intent. Even as he sprang, he did but feign to cheat Achaean eyes. Then did his brother stay his fury and spoke with pacifying words, fearing lest all they had toiled for should be lost. Forbear wrath, Menelaus, now it were shame to slay your wedded wife, for whose sake we have suffered much affliction, while we sought vengeance on Priam. Not, as you do seem, was Helen the sin, but his who set at naught the guest lord and your hospitable board. So with death pangs has God requited him. Then hearkened Menelaus to his rede, but the gods, paled in dark clouds, mourned for Troy, a ruined glory save fair-tressed Tritonis and Hera. Their hearts triumphed when they saw the burge of god-descended Priam destroyed. Yet not the wise heart Trito-born herself was wholly tearless, for within her fane outraged Cassandra was of Oileus' son lust-maddened. But grim vengeance upon him before the goddess wreaked, repaying insult with mortal sufferance. Yes, she would not look upon the infamy, but clad herself with shame and wrath as with a cloak. She turned her stern eyes to the temple roof and groaned the holy image, and the hallowed floor quaked mightily. Yet did he not forbear his mad sin, for his soul was lust distraught. Here, there, on all sides crumbled flaming homes in ruin down, scorched dust with smoke was blent, trembled the streets to the awful thunderous crash. Here burned Aeneas' palace, yonder flamed Antimachus' halls. One furnace was the height of fair-built Pergamus. Flames were roaring around Apollo's temple, around Athena's fane, and round the hearth lord's altar. Flames licked up fair chambers of the sons of a king, and all the city sank down into hell. Of Trojans, some by Argos' sons were slain, some by their own roofs crashing down in fire, giving at once in death and tomb to them. Some in their own throats plunged the steel when foes and fire were in the porch together seen. Some slew their wives and children and flung themselves dead on them when despair had done its work of horror. One who deemed the foe afar caught up a vase, and, fain to quench the flame, hasted for water, leapt unmarked him an Argive, and his spirit, heavy with wine, was thrust forth from the body by the spear. Clashed the void vase around him as he fell backward within the house. As through his hall another fled, the burning roof beam crashed down on his head, and swift death came with it. And many women, as in frenzied flight they rushed forth, suddenly remembered babes left in their beds beneath those burning roofs. With wild feet they sped back. The house fell upon them, and they perished, mother and child. Horses and dogs in panic through the town fled from the flames, trampling beneath their feet the dead, and dashing into living men to their sore hurt. Shrieks rang through all the town, and through his blazing porchway rushed a man to rescue wife and child. Through smoke and flame blindly he groped, and perished while he cried their names, and pitiless doom slew those within. The fire glow upward mounted to the sky, the red glare over the firmament spread its wings, and all the tribes of folk that dwelt around beheld it, far as Ida's mountain crests, and sea-girt Tenedos, and Thracian Samos. And men that voyaged on the deep sea cried, "The Argives have achieved their mighty task after long toil, for star-eyed Helen's sake. All Troy, the once queen city, burns in fire. For all their prayers, no god defends them now. For strong fate oversees all works of men, and the renownless and obscure to fame she raises, and brings low the exalted ones. Oft out of good is evil brought, and good from evil, amid the labor and change of life." So spoke they who from afar beheld the glare of Troy's burning. Compassed were her folk with wailing misery. Through her streets the foe exulted, as when maddened blasts turmoil the boundless sea. What time the altar ascends to heaven's star pavement, turned to the misty south over against Arcturus, tempest-breathed, and with its rising leap the wild winds forth, and ships full many are whelmed beneath ravening seas. Wild as those stormy winds, Achaea's sons ravaged steep Ilium while she burned in flame. As when a mountain clothed with shaggy wood burns swiftly in fire blast, winged with winds, and from her tall peaks goes up a roar, and all the forest children this way and that rush through the wood, tormented by the flame, so were the Trojans perishing. There was none to save of all the gods. Round these were staked the nets of fate, which no man can escape. Then were Demophoon and Acamas by mighty Theseus's mother Aethra met. Yearning to see them was she guided on to meet them by some blessed one. The while wildered from war and fire she fled. They saw in that red glare a woman, royal tall, imperial molded, and they weened that this was Priam's queen, and with swift eagerness laid hands on her to lead her captive thence to the Danaans. But piteously she moaned, "Ah, do not, noble sons of warrior Greeks, to your ships hale me, as I were a foe. I am not of Trojan birth, of Danaan came my princely blood renowned. In treason's halls Pythias begat me, Aegeus wedded me, and of my womb sprang Theseus, glory crowned. For great Zeus's sake, for your dear parents' sake, I pray you, if the seed of Theseus came here with Atreus' sons, oh, bring you me unto their yearning eyes. I think they be young men like you. My soul shall be refreshed if living I behold those chieftains too." Hearkening to her, they called their sire to mind, his deeds for Helen's sake, and how the sons of Zeus the Thunderer in the old times smote Aphidnae when, because these were but babes, their nurses hid them far from peril of fight, and Aethra they remembered. All she endured through wars as mother-in-law at first, and thrall thereafter of Helen. Dumb for joy were they, till spoke Demophoon to that wistful one. "Even now the gods fulfill your heart's desire. We whom you see are the sons of him, your noble son. You shall our loving hands bear to the ships, with joy to Hellas' soil we will bring you, where you were once a queen. Then his great father's mother clasped him round with clinging arms. She kissed his shoulders broad, his head, his breast, his bearded lips she kissed, and Acamas's kissed withal. The while she shed her glad tears on these who could not choose but weep, as when one tarries mid alien men, and folk report him dead, but suddenly he comes home. His children see his face and break into glad weeping, yes, and he his arms around them, and their little heads upon his shoulders sobs. Echoes the home with happy morning's music beating wings, so wept they with sweet sighs and sorrowless moans. Then to affliction-burdened Priam's child, Laodice, they say, stretched her hands to heaven, praying the mighty gods that earth might gape to swallow her, before she defiled her hands with thrall's work, and a god gave ear and rent deep earth beneath her. So by heaven's decree did earth's abysmal chasm receive the maid in Troy's last hour. Electra's self withal, the star queen lovely robed, shrouded her form in mist and cloud, and left the Pleiad band, her sisters, as the old legend tells. Still rises up in sight of toil-worn men their bright troop in the skies, but she alone hides, viewless ever, since the hallowed town of her son Dardanus in ruin fell. When Zeus most high from heaven could help her not, because to fate the might of Zeus must bow, and by the immortal's purpose all these things had come to pass, or by fate's ordinance. Still on Troy's folk the Argives wreaked their wrath, and battle's issues strife incarnate held. That was the end of book 13. This is the final book, 14. Then rose from ocean dawn the golden-throned up to the heavens. Night into chaos sank, and now the Argives spoiled fair-fenced Troy and took her boundless treasures for a prey. Like river torments seemed they that sweep down before rain, floods swelled in thunder from the hills, and seaward hurl tall trees and whatsoever grows on the mountains, mingled with the wreck of shattered cliff and crag. So the long lines of Danaans who had wasted Troy with fire seemed, streaming with her plunder to the ships. Troy's daughters, therewithal in scattered bands, they hailed down seaward, virgins yet unwed, and new-made brides and matrons, silver-haired, and mothers, from whose bosoms foes had torn babes, for the last time closing lips on breasts. Amidst of these Menelaus led his wife, forth of the burning city, having wrought a mighty triumph. Joy and shame were his. Cassandra, heavenly fair, was hailed the prize of Agamemnon. To Achilles' son Andromache had fallen. Hecuba Odysseus dragged unto his ship. The tears poured from her eyes as water from a spring. Trembled her limbs, fear-frenzied was her heart, rent were her hoary tresses, and besprent with ashes of the hearth, cast by her hands when she saw Priam slain and Troy aflame, and yes, she deeply groaned for thraldom's day that trapped her vainly loth. Each hero led a wailing Trojan woman to his ship. Here, there, uprose from these the wild lament, the woeful mingling cries of mother and babe, as when with white-tusked swine the herdmen drive their younglings from the hill pens to the plain as winter closes in, and evermore each answers each with mingled plaintive cries. So moaned Troy's daughters by their foes enslaved, handmaid and queen made one in thraldom's lot. But Helen raised no lamentation. Shame sat on her dark blue eyes and cast its flush over her lovely cheeks. Her heart beat hard with sore misgiving, lest, as to the ships she passed, the Achaeans might mishandle her. Therefore with fluttering soul she trembled sore, and, her head darkly mantled in her veil, close following trod she in her husband's steps. With cheek shame crimsoned, like the queen of love, what time the heaven abiders saw her clasped in Ares' arms, shaming in sight of all the marriage bed, trapped in the myriad meshed toils of Hephaestus, tangled there she lay in agony of shame, while thronged around the blessed. And there stood Hephaestus' self, for fearful it is for wives to be beheld by husbands' eyes doing the deed of shame. Lovely as she is in form and roseate blush past Helen, mid the Trojan captives on to the Argive ships. But the folk all around marveled to see the glory of loveliness of that all-flawless woman. No man dared or secretly or openly to cast reproach on her. As on a goddess, all gazed on her with adoring, wistful eyes, as when to wanderers on a stormy sea, after long time and passion of prayer, the sight of fatherland is given. From deadly deeps escaped, they stretch hands to her joyful-souled. So joyed the Danaans all. No man of them remembered any more war's labor and pain. Such thoughts Cytherea stirred in them, for grace to Helen starry-eyed, and Zeus her father. Then when he saw that burg beloved destroyed, Xanthus, scarce drawing breath from bloody war, mourned with his nymphs for the ruin fallen on Troy, mourned for the city of Priam blotted out. As when hail lashes a field of ripened wheat and beats it small and smites off all the ears with merciless scourge, and leveled with the ground are stalks, and on the earth is all the grain woefully wasted, and the harvest's lord is stricken with deadly grief. So Xanthus' soul was utterly whelmed in grief, for Ilium made a desolation. Grief undying was his, immortal though he was. Mourned Simois and long-ridged Ida. All who on Ida dwelt wailed from afar the ruin of Priam's town. But with loud laughter of glee the Argives sought their galleys, chanting the triumphant might of victory, chanting now the blessed ones, now their own valor, and Epius' work ever renowned. Their song soared up to heaven, like the multitudinous cries of daws when breaks a day of sunny calm and windless air after a ruining storm. From their glad hearts so rose the joyful clamor, till the gods heard and rejoiced in heaven, all who had helped with willing hands the war-fain Argive men. But chafed those others which had aided Troy, beholding Priam's city wrapped in flame, yet powerless for her help to override fate. For not Cronos' son can stay the hand of destiny, whose might transcends all the immortals, and Zeus sanctions all her deeds. The Argives on the flaming altar wood laid many thighs of oxen, and made haste to spill sweet wine on their burnt offerings, thanking the gods for that great work achieved. And loudly at the feast they sang the praise of all the mailed men whom the house of Tree had ambushed. Far-famed Sinon they extolled for that dire torment he endured of foes. Yes, song and honor guerdons without end all rendered him, and that resolved soul glad-hearted joy for the Argives' victory, and for his own misfeaturing sorrowed not. For to the wise and prudent man renown is better far than gold, than goodly head, than all good things men have or hope to win. So feasting by the ships, all void of fear, cried one to another ever and anon, We have touched the goal of this long war, have won glory, have smitten our foes and their great town. Now grant, O Zeus, to our prayers safe home return, but not to all the sire vouchsafed return. Then rose a cunning harper in their midst, and sang the song of triumph and of peace re-won, and with glad hearts untouched by care they heard. For no more fear of war had they, but of sweet toil of law-abiding days and blissful fleeting hours henceforth they dreamed. All the war's story in their eager ears he sang, how leagued people gathering met at hallowed Aulis, how the invincible strength of Peleus' son smote fenced cities 12 in sea raids, how he marched over leagues on leagues of land and spoiled 11. All he wrought in fight with Telephus and Eetion, how he slew giant Cycnos, and the toil of war that through Achilles' wrath befell the Achaeans. How he dragged dead Hector round his own Troy's walls, and how he slew in fight Penthesilea and Tithonus' son. How Ajax laid low Glaucus, lord of spears. Then sang he how the child of Aeacus' son struck down Eurypylus, and how the shafts of Philoctetes dealt to Paris death. Then the song named all heroes who passed to ambush in the house of Guile, and hymned the fall of god-descended Priam's Burge. The feast he sang last, and peace after war. Then many another, as they listed, sang. But when above those feasters midnight stars hung, ceased the Danaans from the feast and wine, and turned to sleep's forgetfulness of care. For that with yesterday's war labor all were wearied, wherefore they, who fain all night had revelled, needs must cease. How loth soever sleep drew them thence, here, there, soft slumbered they. But in his tent Menelaus lovingly with bright-haired Helen spoke, for on their eyes sleep had not yet fallen. The Cyprian queen brooded above their souls, that olden love might be renewed and heartache chased away. Helen first broke the silence, and she said, O Menelaus, be not angry with me. Not of my will I left your roof, your bed. Not Alexander and the sons of Troy. They came upon me and snatched away when you were far from there. Oftentimes did I essay by the death noose to perish wretchedly, or by the bitter sword, but still they stayed my hand, and still spoke comfortable words to salve my grief for you and my sweet child. For her sake, for the sake of olden love, and for your own, I beseech you now, forget your stern displeasure against your wife. Answered her Menelaus, wise of wit, no more remember past griefs. Seal them up, hide in your heart. Let all be locked within the dim, dark mansion of forgetfulness. What profits it to call ill deeds to mind? Glad was she then, fear fitted from her heart, and came sweet hope that her lord's wrath was dead. She cast her arms around him, and their eyes with tears were brimming as they made sweet moan, and side by side they laid them, and their hearts thrilled with remembrance of old spousal joy. And as a vine and ivy entwine their stems around each other, that no might of wind avails to sever them, so clung these two, twined in the passionate embrace of love. When came on these two sorrow, drowning sleep, even then above his son's head rose and stood godlike Achilles' mighty shade, in form as when he lived, the Trojan's bane, the joy of Greeks, and kissed his neck and flashing eyes lovingly, and spoke comfortable words. All hail, my son. Vex not your heart with grief for your dead father, for with the blessed gods now at the feast I sit. Refrain your soul from sorrow, and plant my strength within your mind. Be foremost of the Argives ever. Yield to none in valor, but in council bow before your elders. So shall all acclaim your courtesy. Honor princely men and wise, for the true man is still the true man's friend, even as the vile man cleaves to the knave. If good your thought be, good shall be your deeds. But no man shall attain to honor's height, except his heart be right within. Her stern is hard to climb, and high in heaven spread her branches. Only they whom strength and toil attend strain up to pluck her blissful fruit, climbing the tree of honor, glow crowned. You, therefore, follow fame, and let your soul not be in sorrow afflicted overmuch, nor in prosperity over glad. To friends, to comrades, child, and wife be kindly of heart, remembering still that near to all men stand the gates of doom, the mansions of the dead. For humankind are like the flower of grass, the blossom of spring. These fade the while those bloom. Therefore be ever kindly with your kind. Now to the Argives say, to Atreus' son Agamemnon chiefly, if my battle toil round Priam's walls, and to those sea raids I led, or ever I set foot on Trojan land, be in their hearts remembered. To my tomb be Priam's daughter, Polyxena, led, whom as my portion of the spoil I claim, and sacrificed thereon, else shall my wrath against them more than for Briseis burn. The waves of the great deep will I turmoil to bar their way, upstirring storm on storm, that through their own mad folly pining away here they may linger long, until to me they pour drink offerings, yearning sore for home. But when they have slain the maiden, I grudge not that those whose will may bury her far from me. Then as a wind breath swift he fleeted thence, and came to the Elysian plain, whereto a path to heaven reaches, for the feet ascending and descending of the blessed. Then the son started up from sleep, and called his father to mind, and glowed the heart in him. When to wide heaven the child of mist uprose, scattering night, unveiling earth and air, then from their rest upsprang Achaea's sons, yearning for home. With laughter again they hailed down to the sea the keels, but lo, their haste was reined in by Achilles' mighty son. He assembled them and told his father's behest. Listen, dear sons of Argives, battle staunch, to this my glorious father's request. To me, spoken in darkness, slumbering on my bed, he said he dwells with the immortal gods. He bids you and Atreus' son, the king, to bring, as his war-guerdon passing fair to his dim dark tomb, Polyxena, queenly robed, to slay her there, but far thence bury her. But if you slight him and essay to sail the sea, he threatens to stir up the waves, to bar your path upon the deep, and here storm-bound long time to hold you, ships and men. Then hearkened they, and as to a god they prayed, for even now a storm blast on the sea upheaved the waves, broad-backed and thronging fast more than before beneath the madding wind. Tossed the great deep, smit by Poseidon's hands for the grace to strong Achilles. All the winds swooped on the waters, prayed they all to Achilles, and a man to his fellow cried, Great Zeus' seed Achilles verily was. Therefore is he a god, who in days past dwelt among us, for lapse of dateless time makes not the sons of heaven to fade away. Then to Achilles' tomb the host returned, and led the maid, as calf by herdmen dragged for sacrifice, from woodland pastures torn from its mother's side, and lowing long and loud it moans with anguished heart. So Priam's child wailed in the hands of foes. Down streamed her tears as when, beneath the heavy sacks of sand, olives, clear-skinned, never blotched by drops of storm, pour out their oil, when the long levers creak as strong men strain the cords. So poured the tears of labor-burdened Priam's daughter, hailed to stern Achilles' tomb, tears blent with moans. Drenched were her bosom folds, glistened the drops on her flesh, clear white as costly ivory. Then, to crown all her griefs, yet sharper pain fell on the heart of hapless Hecuba. Then did her soul recall that awful dream, the vision of sleep of that night overpast. Her seemed that on Achilles' tomb she stood moaning, her hair down streaming to the ground, and from her breasts blood dripped to earth that while, and drenched the tomb. Fear haunted touching this, foreboding all calamity, she wailed piteously. Far rang her wild lament, as a dog moaning at her master's door utters long howls, her teats with milk distant, whose whelps, ere their eyes opened to the light, her lords afar have flung, a prey to kites, and now with short, sharp cries she plains, and now long howling, the weird outcry thrills the air, so wailed and shrieked for her child Hecuba. Ah me, what sorrows first or last shall I lament, heart anguished? Who am I, full of foes, those unimagined ills my sons, my kings have suffered, or my city, or daughters shamed, or my despair, my days of slavery? Oh, the grim fates have caught me in a net of manifold ills. O child, they have spun for you dread weird of unimagined misery. They have thrust you away when near was Hymen's hymn, for your espousals, marked you for destruction dark, unendurable, unspeakable. For lo, a dead man's heart, Achilles' heart, is by our blood made warm with life today. O child, dear child, that I might die with you, that earth might swallow me before I see your doom. So cried she, weeping, never ceasing tears, for grief on bitter grief encompassed her. But when these reached divine Achilles' tomb, then did his son unsheathe the whetted sword. His left hand grasped the maid, and his right hand was laid upon the tomb, and thus he cried, Hear, Father, your son's prayer, hear all the prayers of Argives, and be no more wroth with us. Lo, unto you now all your heart's desire we will fulfill. Be gracious to us, you, and to our praying grant sweet home return. Into the maid's throat he plunged the blade of death. The dear life straightway sobbed she forth, with the last piteous moan of parting breath. Face downward to the earth she fell, all round her flesh was crimson from her neck, as snow stained on a mountainside, with scarlet blood rushing from javelin smitten boar or bear. The maiden's corpse then gave they to be borne unto the city, to Antenor's home, for that when Troy yet stood he nurtured her in his fair halls, a bride for his own son Eurymachus. The old man buried her, King Priam's princess child, nigh to his house, by Ganymede's shrines, and over against the temple of Pallas, the unwearied one. Then were the waves stilled, and the blast was hushed to sleep, and all the sea flood lulled to calm. Swift with glad laughter hied they to the ships, hymning Achilles and the blessed ones. The feast they made, first severing the thighs of kine for the immortals, gladsome sacrifice steamed on all sides. In cups of silver and gold they drank sweet wine, their hearts leaped up with hope of winning to their fatherland again. But when with meats and wine all these were filled, then in their eager ears spoke Neleus' son. Hear, friends who have escaped the long turmoil of war, that I may say to you one welcome word. Now is the hour of our heart's delight, the hour of home return. Away, Achilles' soul has ceased from ruinous wrath. Earth-shaker stills the stormy wave, and gentle breezes blow. No more the waves toss high. Haste, hail the ships down to the sea. Now, ho, for home return. Eager they heard, and ready made the ships. Then was a marvelous portent seen of men, for all unhappy Priam's queen was changed from woman's form into a pitiful hound, and all men gathered round in wondering awe. Then all her body a god, transformed to stone, a mighty marvel for men yet unborn. At Calchas' bidding this the Achaeans bore in a swift ship to Hellespont's far side. Then down to the sea in haste they ran the keels, their wealth they laid aboard, even all the spoil taken, or ever unto Troy they came, from conquered neighbor peoples, therewithal whatso they took from Ilium, wherein most they joyed, for untold was the sum thereof. And followed with them many a captive maid with anguished heart. So went they aboard the ships, but Calchas would not with that eager host launch forth. Yes, he had fain withheld therefrom all the Achaeans, for his prophet soul foreboded dread destruction looming over the Argives by the rocks Capharian. But not they heeded him, malignant fate deluded men's souls. Only Amphilochus, the wise in prophet lore, the gallant son of princely Amphiaraus, stayed with him. Fated were these two, far from their own land, to reach Pamphylian and Sicilian burgs, and this the gods thereafter brought to pass. But now the Achaeans cast the hawsers loose from shore, in haste they heaved the anchor stones, roared Hellespont beneath swift flashing oars, crashed the prows through the sea, about the bows much armor of slain foes was lying heaped, along the bulwarks victory trophies hung countless, with garlands wreathed they all the ships, their heads, the spears, the shields, wherewith they had fought against their foes. The chiefs stood on the prows and poured into the dark sea once and again, whined to the gods to grant them safe return. But with the winds their prayers mixed. Far away vainly they floated, blent with cloud and air. With anguished hearts the captive maids looked back on Ilium, and with sobs and moans they wailed, striving to hide their grief from Argive eyes. Clasping their knees, some sat in misery, some veiled with their hands their faces, others nursed young children in their arms. Those innocents not yet bewailed their day of bondage, nor their country's ruin. All their thoughts were set on comfort of the breast, for the babe's heart has none affinity with sorrow. All sat with upbraided hair and pitiful breasts scored with their fingers. On their cheeks there lay stains of dried tears, and streamed thereover now fresh tears, full fast, as still they gazed aback on the hapless, lost home. Wherefrom yet rose the flames, and over it writhed the rolling smoke. Now on Cassandra marveling they gazed, calling to mind her prophecy of doom. But at their tears she laughed, in bitter scorn, in anguish for the ruin of her land. Such Trojans as had escaped from pitiless war gathered to render now the burial dues unto their cities slain, and nor led to that sad work one pyre for all they raised. But laughed with triumphing hearts the Argive men, as now with oars they swept over dark seaways, now hastily hoisted the sails high over the ships, and fleeted fast astern Dardania land, and hero Achilles' tomb. But now their hearts, how blithe soever, remembered comrades slain, and sorely grieved and wistfully they looked back to the aliens' land. It seemed to them, sliding farther from their ships. Full soon by Tenedos' beach slipped they. Now they ran by Crissa, Sminthean Phoebus' holy place, and hallowed Kylla. Far away they glimpsed the windy heights of Lesbos. Rounded now was Lecton's foreland, where is the last peak of Ida. In the sails loud hummed the wind, crashed round the prows the dark surge. The long waves showed shadowy hulls, far from the white wake gleamed. Now had the Argives all to the hallowed soil of Hellas won, by perils of the deep unscathed. But for Athena, daughter of Zeus the Thunderer, and her indignation's wrath, when nigh Euboea's windy heights they drew, she rose in anger unappeasable against the Locrian king, devising doom crushing and pitiless, and drew nigh to Zeus, lord of the gods, and spoke to him apart in wrath, that in her breast would not be pent. Zeus, father, unendurable of the gods is men's presumption. They reck not of you, of none of the blessed reck they, for as much as vengeance follows after sin, no more, and oft times more afflicted are good men than evil, and their misery has no end. Therefore no man regards justice. Shame lives not with men, and I will not dwell hereafter in Olympus, not be named your daughter, if I may not be avenged on the Achaeans' reckless sin. Behold, within my very temple Oileus' son has wrought iniquity, has pitied not Cassandra, stretching unregarded hands once and again to me. Nor did he dread my might, nor reverenced in his wicked heart the immortal, but a deed intolerable he did. Therefore let not your spirit divine begrudge my heart's desire, that so all men may quake before the manifest wrath of gods. Answered the father with heart-assuaging words, Child, not for the Argives' sake withstand I you, but all my armory which the Cyclops might to win my favor wrought with tireless hands to your desire I give. O strong heart, hurl a ruining storm yourself on the Argive fleet. Then down before the aweless maid he cast swift lightning, thunder, and deadly thunderbolt, and her heart leapt, and gladdened was her soul. She donned the stormy aegis, flashing far adamantine, massy, a marvel to the gods, whereon was wrought Medusa's ghastly head. Fearful, strong serpents breathing forth the blast of ravening fire were on the face thereof. Crashed on the queen's breast all the aegis links, as after lightning crashes the firmament. Then grasped she her father's weapons, which no god save Zeus can lift, and wide Olympus shook. Then swept she clouds and mist together on high. Night over earth was poured, haze over the sea. Zeus watched, and was right glad as broad heaven's floor rocked beneath the goddess's feet, and crashed the sky as though invincible Zeus rushed forth to war. Then sped she Iris unto Achelous from heaven, far flying over misty seas, to bid him send forth all his buffering winds over iron-bound Caphareus' cliffs to sweep ceaselessly, and with ruin of madding blasts to upheave the sea. And Iris heard, and swift she darted through cloud billows plunging down. You had said, Lo, in the sky dark water and fire, and to Aeolia came she, isle of caves, of echoing dungeons, of mad raging winds, with rugged ribs of mountain overarched, whereby the mansion stand of Aeolus Hippotas' son. Him bound she there within with wife and 12 sons, and she told to him Athena's purpose toward the homeland bound Achaeans. He denied her not, but passed forth of his halls, and in resistless hands upswung his trident, smiting the mountainside, within whose chasm cell the wild winds dwelt, tempestuously shrieking. Ever pealed weird roarings of their voices round its vaults. Cleft by his might was the hillside, forth they poured. He bade them on wings bear blackest storm to upheave the sea and shroud Caphareus' heights. Swiftly upsprang they before the king's command was fully spoken. Mightily moaned the sea as they rushed over it. Waves like mountain cliffs from all sides were uprolled. The Achaeans' hearts were terror-pulsied as the up-towering surge now swung the ships up high through palling mist, now hurled them rolled as down a precipice to dark abysses. Up through yawning deep, some power resistless belched the boiling sand from the sea's floor. Tossed in despair, fear-dazed, men could not grasp the oar, nor reef the sail about the yard-arm, howsoever fain, before the winds rent it, could not with the sheets trim the forth canvas, buffeted so were they by ruining blasts. The helmsman had no power to guide the rudder with his practiced hands, for those ill winds hurled all confusedly. No hope of life was left them. Blackest night, fury of tempest, wrath of deathless gods raged around them. Still Poseidon heaved and swung the merciless sea to work the heart's desire of his brother's glorious child, and she on high stormed with her lightnings, ruthless in her rage. Thundered from heaven Zeus, in purpose fixed to glorify his daughter. All the isles on mainlands round were lashed by leaping seas nigh to Euboea, where the power divine scourged most with unrelenting stroke on stroke the Argives. Groan and shriek of perishing men ran through the ships, started great beams, and snapped with ominous sound. Forever ship on ship with shivering timbers crashed. With hopeless toil, men strained with oars to thrust back hulls that reeled down on their own, but with the shattered planks were hurled into the abyss, to perish there by pitiless doom. For beams of foundering ships from this, from that side, battered out their lives, and crushed were all their bodies wretchedly. Some in the ships fell down, and like dead men lay there. Some in the grip of destiny, clinging to oars, smooth-shaven, tried to swim. Some upon planks were tossing. Roared the surge from fathomless depths. It seemed as though sea, sky, and land were blended all confusedly. Still from Olympus, thundering Atritone, wielding her father's power unshamed, and still the welkin shrieked around. Her ruin of wrath now upon Ajax hurled she, on his ship dashed she a thunderbolt, and shivered it wide in a moment into fragments small, while earth and air yelled over the wreck, and whirled and plunged, and fell the whole sea down thereon. They in the ship were all together flung forth. All about them swept the giant waves. Round them leaped lightnings flaming through the dark, choked with the strangling surf of hissing brine, gasping out life. They drifted over the sea. But even in death, those captive maids rejoiced, as some ill-starred ones, clasping to their breasts their babes, sank into the sea. Some flung their arms around Danaans' horror-stricken heads and dragged these down with them, so rendering to their foes requital for foul outrage down to them. And from on high the haughty Trito-born looked down on all this, and her heart was glad. But Ajax floated now on a galley's plank, now through the brine with strong hands oared his path, like some old Titan in his tireless might. Cleft was the salt sea surge by the sinewy hands of that undaunted man. The gods beheld and marveled at his courage and his strength. But now the billows swung him up on high through misty air as through to a mountain's peak, now whelmed him down as they would bury him in ravening whirl-pits. Yet his stubborn hands toiled on unwearied. Yes, to right and left flashed lightnings down and quenched them in the sea, for not yet was the child of thunderer Zeus purposed to smite him dead, despite her wrath, ere he had drained the cup of labor and pain down to the dregs. So in the deep, long time affliction wore him down, tormented sore on every side. Grim fates stood round the man unnumbered, yet despair still kindled strength. He cried, Though all Olympus banded come in wrath and rouse against me all the sea, I will escape them. But no whit did he elude the god's wrath, for the shaker of earth in fierceness of his indignation marked where his hands clung to the Gyraean rock, and in stern anger with an earthquake shook both sea and land. Around on all sides crashed Caphareus's cliffs. Beneath the sea king's wrath the surf-tormented beaches shrieked and roared. The broad crag rifted, reeled into the sea, the rock whereto his desperate hands had clung. Yet did he writhe up round its jutting spurs, while flayed his hands were, and from beneath his nails the blood ran. Wrestling with him roared the waves, and the foam whitened all his hair and beard. Yet had he escaped perchance his evil doom, had not Poseidon, wroth with his hardihood, cleaving the earth, hurled down the chasm the rock, as in the old-time palace, heaved on high Sicily, on huge Enceladus dashed down the isle, which burns with the burning yet of that immortal giant, as he breathes fire underground. So did the mountain crag, hurled from on high, bury the Locrian king, pinning the strong man down, a wretch crushed flat. And so on him death's black destruction came, whom land and sea alike were leagued to slay. Still over the great deep were swept the rest of those Achaeans, crouching terror-dazed down in the ships, save those that mid the waves had fallen. Misery encompassed all, for some with heavily plunging prows drove on, with keels upturned some drifted. Here were masts snapped from the hull by rushing gusts, and there were tempest-rifted wrecks of scattered beams, and some had sunk, whelmed in the mighty deep, swamped by the torrent downpour from the clouds. For these endured not madness of wind-tossed sea leagued with heaven's waterspout, for streamed the sky ceaselessly like a river, while the deep raved around them. And one cried, "Such floods on men fell only when Deucalion's deluge came, when earth was drowned and all was fathomless sea." So cried a Danaan, seeing soul appalled that wild storm. Thousands perished, corpses thronged the great sea highways. All the beaches were too strait for them, the surf belched multitudes forth on the land. The heavy booming sea with weltering beams of ships was wholly paved, and here and there the grey waves gleamed between. So found they each his several evil fate, some whelmed beneath broad rushing billows, some wretchedly perishing with their shattered ships by Nauplius's devising on the rocks, wroth for that son whom they had done to death. He, when the storm rose and the Argives died, rejoiced amid his sorrow, seeing a god gave to his hands revenge, which now he wreaked upon the host he hated, as over the deep they tossed, sore harassed. To his sea god father he prayed that all might perish, ships and men whelmed in the deep. Poseidon heard his prayer, and on the dark surge swept them nigh his land. He, like a harbor warder, lifted high a blazing torch, and so by guile he trapped the Achaean men, who deemed that they had won a sheltering haven. But sharp reefs and crags gave awful welcome unto ships and men, who, dashed to pieces on the cruel rocks in that black night, crowned ills with direr ills. Some few escaped by a god or power unseen, plucked from death's hand. Athena now rejoiced her heart within, and now was racked with fears for prudent-souled Odysseus, for his weird was through Poseidon's wrath to suffer woes full many. But Earthshaker's jealousy now burned against those long walls and towers, uphiled by the strong Argives for offense against the Trojans' battle onset. Swiftly then he swelled to overbrimming all the sea that rolls from Euxine down to Hellespont, and hurled it on the shore of Troy. And Zeus, for a grace unto the glorious shaker of earth, poured rain from heaven. Withal Far Darter bare in that great work his part, From Ida's heights into one channel led he all her streams and flooded the Achaeans' work. The sea dashed over it, and the roaring torrents still rushed on it, swollen by the rains of Zeus, and the dark surge on the wide moaning sea still hurled them back from mingling with the deep, till all the Danaan walls were blotted out beneath their desolating flood. Then earth was by Poseidon chasm cleft, uprushed deluge of water, slime, and sand, while quaked Sigeum with the mighty shock, and roared the beach and the foundations of the land Dardanian. So vanished, whelmed from sight, that mighty rampart. Earth asunder yawned, and all sank down, and only sand was seen. When back the sea rolled over the beach outspread far down the heavy booming shore. All this the immortals' anger wrought, but in their ships the Argives, storm dispersed, went sailing on. So came they home, as heaven guided each, even all that escaped the fell sea tempest's blasts. Oh, nerds. That was a lot to read. It really is just so interesting. There was a lot happening there. A lot of really horrific trauma for the women of Troy. At least we have Euripides' play. I need to recover that one, actually. But at least we do get, like, there was one kind of righteous moment, you know? It was interesting to me reading it this way because I feel like it's not totally clear. So the whole quite epic attack by Athena and like the other gods on Ajax's ship, right? That's Ajax the Lesser. And now, so there's two Ajaxes. The one, you know, we looked at earlier, he unfortunately went a little divine mad over the Achilles' armor. It's a whole thing. I'm not rehashing it. But this one, Ajax the Lesser, is most famous for raping Cassandra in Athena's temple. And I love that this text doesn't go into that trauma. It just is like, he did this horrific thing and Athena's going to beat the living shit out of him before he dies. And that was cool. And that Athena actually helps a woman and like gets to use Zeus's thunderbolts. Like, that was a whole vibe. And I was really here for it. And this is just utterly fascinating. Really, really interesting. The Aeneas thing, the little like, he's gonna found Rome, don't forget, it's fine. It's such an interesting change to the Iliad where it's like, Rome doesn't exist. And I have so many thoughts on Aeneas. But that was enough to read before 9 a.m. So we're wrapping it up there. I have no idea what I'm going to read next for reading episodes. We have a little while because of fun themed months coming up. But if you have any suggestions, feel free to comment them on Spotify or send them in by email. But frankly, I'm living for the Spotify comments. So if you're listening on there, I don't know, drop me a little line. They're really fun. Let's talk about Myths, Baby. It was written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Not this, though. Obviously, Quintus Smyrnaeus wrote that. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians, my incredible assistant producer, who's just doing great work every goddamn day. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned for so much going on. If you're looking for ad-free subscriptions or generally to support the show, there is new stuff coming, better stuff coming, more regular stuff coming, and more ways to subscribe and get things. So stay tuned for all of that. Oh gosh, there's so much going on. I'm going to stop now. Thank you all so much. I am Liv, and I really do love this shit. I can't wait to figure out a next thing to read. Ugh. Ancient texts, am I right?